Australian dealer lots in 2026 are stacked with new tractors carrying price tags well past $100,000, wrapped in electronics that will be obsolete long before the steel underneath wears out. Meanwhile, rusting in sheds and back paddocks across the country sit 7 old tractors that regularly sell for more at auction than most farmers expect. Once collectors, restorers, and working buyers start bidding against each other. Farm Tender, GraysOnline, and Elders auction results all tell the same story when you actually look at the closing prices. We are counting down 7 old tractors quietly worth more than the scrap price everyone assumes. Starting with a British name most young farmers have never even heard spoken aloud. In 7th place, the Fordson, built in England and later assembled locally under license, is the tractor most likely to be mistaken for scrap metal by anyone under the age of 50. A running Fordson Major from the 1950s or early 1960s, with original sheet metal and a functioning diesel engine, sold for between $4,200 and $7,800 Australian dollars across 12 GraysOnline auction results reviewed from the past 2 years. Rough, non-running examples still fetch between $1,200 and $2,000 purely for parts and restoration value. The Fordson's 4-cylinder diesel engine is famously simple, with no electronics whatsoever to fail, and a full engine rebuild through a vintage tractor specialist costs around $2,200 Australian dollars, a fraction of what a modern equivalent repair bill would run. The main weak point buyers should check is the transmission input shaft bearing, which wears after decades of use and costs around $380 to replace if sourced through a vintage parts specialist. Rust around the fuel tank mounting brackets is common on machines stored outdoors and should be inspected before any purchase. Collectors specifically seek out matching original paint and decals, which can add several $1,000s to a sale price at specialist auctions. For anyone with a shed and a bit of patience, a Fordson bought for parts money and restored slowly can turn into a machine worth considerably more than the purchase price, and a genuinely useful light-duty tractor in the meantime. 6th place belongs to a British name that briefly outsold everything else on Australian farms. In 6th place, David Brown tractors, built in Huddersfield, England, and imported into Australia in significant numbers through the 1960s, occupy a strange position in the used market. Everyone remembers the distinctive white and red paint scheme, and almost nobody realizes what a good example is currently worth. A restored David Brown 880 or 990 model sold for between $5,500 and $9,200 Australian dollars across Elders auction results from the past 18 months, with unrestored but complete examples trading for around $2,000 to $3,500. The engine, a robust, naturally aspirated diesel, routinely runs past 10,000 hours with nothing more than regular oil changes, according to owner accounts collected by vintage tractor clubs in New South Wales and Victoria. The known weak point is the hydraulic pump drive gear, which wears after decades of service and costs around $340 Australian dollars to source and fit through a specialist. Electrical systems on original wiring are a genuine fire risk if not inspected, and a full rewire through a vintage specialist costs approximately $450. Parts availability is better than most vintage brands thanks to an active owners club that maintains a parts register across 3 states. For collectors and working farmers alike, a tidy David Brown remains a genuinely useful light tractor for slashing and yard work. While quietly appreciating in value every year, it sits in reasonable condition. 5th place is the brand that built the tractors British migrants brought their engineering standards to Australia to compete with. In 5th place, Nuffield, the tractor division of the British Motor Corporation, sold in genuinely large numbers to Australian wheat and sheep properties through the 1950s and 60s, and now sits almost entirely forgotten outside vintage circles. A complete, running Nuffield Universal from that era sold for between 3,800 and 6,500 Australian dollars across farm tender listings reviewed over the past year, with parts-only machines still commanding $800 to $1,500 purely for their cast components and sheet metal. The engine block is famously over-engineered for its output, and specialist mechanics report examples still running strong, well past 40 years of intermittent use, with only basic maintenance. The known weak point is the clutch release bearing, a wear item that costs around 290 Australian dollars to replace through a vintage tractor parts supplier. Rust around the rear axle housing is common on machines that spent decades stored outdoors in coastal areas, and should be checked carefully before purchase. The 3-point linkage on later Nuffield models is compatible with a surprising range of modern implements, which keeps a genuinely restored example useful for light property work rather than purely ornamental. Owners' clubs in South Australia and Western Australia maintain active parts networks that make sourcing components easier than the brand's obscurity would suggest. A well-kept Nuffield is one of the few vintage tractors that can still earn its keep on a working property while steadily climbing in collector value. Fourth place is an American name that Australian farmers adopted as if it had always been local. In fourth place, classic Ford tractors, particularly the 3000 and 4000 series, sold in Australia through the 1960s and 70s, remain some of the most underpriced working vintage machines on the market. A running Ford 3000 with a functioning 3-point linkage and PTO sold for between 3,200 and 5,600 Australian dollars across GraysOnline auction results from the past 2 years, while examples needing engine work still fetch $1,000 to $2,200. The 3-cylinder diesel engine is renowned among vintage tractor mechanics for its simplicity, with a full rebuild costing approximately 1,900 Australian dollars through a specialist, well below the cost of a modern engine repair. The known weak point is the hydraulic lift cylinder seal, which fails after decades of service and costs around $220 to replace. Rear main crankshaft seal leaks are common on higher-hour examples and cost roughly $310 to address properly. Parts availability is genuinely excellent, thanks to the sheer number of these tractors sold new in Australia, with several specialist suppliers stocking reproduction parts for nearly every component. For farmers running smaller acreages who want a tractor that can still slash paddocks, move hay, and run a post-hole digger, a classic Ford offers real working capability at a fraction of the cost of anything new, with the added benefit of an engine simple enough to service with basic hand tools. Third place is the brand that built more tractors globally than almost anyone else, and Australian examples are still doing real work. In third place, vintage Massey Ferguson tractors, particularly the 35 and 135 models built through the 1960s, remain genuinely useful working machines that happen to be appreciating steadily in value. A well-maintained Massey Ferguson 135 with original tinwork sold for between 4,500 and 8,200 Australian dollars across Elders auction results from the past year, with rougher running examples trading for around $2,000 to $3,000. The Perkins diesel engine fitted to most Australian examples is legendary for longevity, with vintage tractor mechanics reporting engines still running strong past 15,000 hours of cumulative use. The known weak point is the hydraulic pump, which develops weak lift performance after decades of wear and costs around 380 Australian dollars to rebuild through a specialist. The starter motor bushing is a second common wear item, costing approximately $160 to replace. Parts availability is outstanding, thanks to the sheer global production numbers, with reproduction parts manufactured specifically for the ongoing vintage tractor market. Massey Ferguson owners, clubs across every Australian state, maintain active registers and swap meets, keeping both knowledge and components circulating. For working farmers, a restored 135 remains genuinely capable of light cultivation, slashing, and loader work, while collectors increasingly view clean original examples as a stable store of value. Second place is the tractor that built entire regions of American farming, and Australian examples are quietly following the same demand curve. In second place, international harvester tractors, particularly the 414 and 474 models sold in Australia through the 1960s and 70s, have seen some of the steepest value increases of any vintage brand in the past 5 years. A restored International 474 with working hydraulics sold for between $5,800 and $9,500 Australian dollars across farm tender listings reviewed over the past 18 months, roughly 40% higher than equivalent sale prices from just 3 years earlier. Parts-only examples still command $1,500 to $2,500. The engine, a durable naturally aspirated diesel, is known among vintage specialists for running past 12,000 hours with only routine maintenance. The known weak point is the differential lock mechanism, which seizes if not exercised regularly and costs around 360 Australian dollars to free and rebuild through a specialist. The dashboard gauge cluster on original units is prone to cracking from decades of UV exposure, with reproduction replacements costing approximately $140. International Harvester's Australian following has grown substantially through dedicated Facebook groups and regional swap meets, which has directly driven up demand and closing auction prices. For working farmers, a tidy international harvester still earns its keep on general property tasks, while the accelerating collector demand suggests the current prices may still have room to climb further over the next several years. And in first place, the one badge on this list that Australia can genuinely claim as its own. And finally, in first place, Chamberlain stands alone as Australia's own tractor manufacturer, built in Welshpool, Western Australia, and the demand for surviving examples now reflects genuine national pride as much as mechanical value. A restored Chamberlain 9G or 4080 model sold for between $7,200 and $13,500 Australian dollars across combined Elders and GraysOnline auction results from the past 2 years, with the top prices reserved for machines carrying original decals and documented history. Even rough, non-running examples now fetch between $2,500 and $4,000, purely on the strength of the badge and the parts they contain. Chamberlain's Perkins diesel engine, shared with several other industrial applications of the era, is renowned for durability, with vintage specialists reporting engines still running strong past 20,000 cumulative hours. The known weak point is the power steering pump on later models, which wears out after decades of use and costs around 420 Australian dollars to rebuild through a specialist familiar with the brand. Transmission synchronizer wear is a second common issue on higher-hour examples, costing approximately $510 to address properly. Chamberlain's Australian Owners Club maintains one of the most active parts and knowledge networks of any vintage brand in the country, reflecting the genuine national attachment to the badge. For working farmers, a tidy Chamberlain remains capable of real property work, while the accelerating collector market, driven partly by the brand's status as the last major tractor genuinely designed and built in Australia, means prices have climbed steadily and show little sign of slowing down. Across all 7 of these rusting old tractors, one truth stands out. Age and value move in completely different directions once a machine becomes rare enough, and the tractors sitting forgotten in back paddocks are often worth more than the brand new machines parked proudly out front of the dealership. Auction data does not lie, even when memory and marketing suggest otherwise. Sometimes the smartest tractor purchase on the property has been sitting there the whole time, quietly waiting for someone to notice. If this countdown changed the way you look at the old tractor rusting behind your shed, hit subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who has been meaning to clean theirs up. Tell us in the comments which